When you talk about the changes in, say, Africa versus Asia and Latin America, is the trend of Africa accelerating to get worse?
Although within Africa, there are some countries that are improving, some countries which are not. So at least we see that there is potential to improve. Just an issue that we need to scale up that improvement to all the countries in Africa.
Welcome to the show, Maximo.
Nice to see you again.
It's great to be here at the FAO.
A pleasure to have you here.
Yeah. So you're the Chief Economist at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Tell me, what is that like?
It has been complex since COVID-19 and then the war in Ukraine and now all the political volatility and the vulnerabilities that we have to face. So this has been a very challenging but extremely interesting job. I am doing things I never thought I was going to do in my life, but as an economist, I always take this as a positive challenge.
We spoke around this time last year, but for anyone who hasn't heard that episode, they obviously should. But we're on video now, so it's better. Can you tell us a little bit just about your journey to get to FAO?
I started as a researcher, of course. I did my PhD in California, in Los Angeles, but then I moved back to my home country in Peru, where I continue doing my research. I was working in a think tank in Peru. Then I moved to IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, which is based in Washington. And I spent 12 really nice years there trying to innovate and bring innovations. But then I questioned myself how much of those innovations could be scaled up. So I was happy with how solid they were and scientifically tested. But the idea was to how we scale that up. And that's why I decided to move to the World Bank. So I was an executive director in the bank, which is a different role in the sense that I was looking at loans around the world and approving loans and also working with the private sector through IFC, the International Financial Corporation. And that helped me a lot to understand the financial world and how the financial mechanisms work, and especially how the private sector could be involved in transforming the agri-food systems. But again, that didn't resolve all the problem. Then the problem was, okay, how we implement this at country level. And that's where the FAO opportunity came up. I started here as what they call an assistant director general. And then I was promoted to chief economist, which didn't exist before. But it was directly linked to senior management. So that allowed me to do things different. Why FAO is so interesting in terms of the scaling up and implementation? Because we work in almost all developing world. We have offices around every country in the world, in the LDCs, LLDCs, SIDS, which allow us to have a significant impact at the country level. That's what I was looking for, because I have ideas of some of the innovations. I have ideas of how we need to push things forward, but I think being able to implement in the country at the country level was a great opportunity, which I am very happy I took at this point.
So you're the first chief economist at FAO?
I am the first chief economist in FAO.
And the only one?
Now I am the only one. There were some attempts to have other chief economists, but I am the only one, thanks God. You don't want too many economists in a place. It's too dangerous.
Well, look, we're here to talk about the annual State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, the SOFI report, which is coming out today. We did a podcast recording on this last year, but for anyone who hasn't heard that episode, why is this work so important?
The work of the SOFI is, I believe, is one of the most important flagships of FAO. Why? Because it gives a photograph of the situation. A photograph of how well we are doing in terms of hunger in the world, on nutrition, but also it touches certain topics which are extremely important. We were touching topics as access to healthy diets, the drivers behind the levels of hunger, conflict, macroeconomic variables, slowdowns, downturns, and also climate, understanding the dynamics and the relationship with hunger. And this year, for example, we are touching the fact that food prices and the food price inflation has been significant in the last years, and still is not going down at the velocity we would like. So I think SOFI tells the world how we are performing and tells us where we are doing good, where we are not, and therefore give us a better guidance of where we need to make significant adjustments so that we can get as close as possible to the zero hunger target that we have, which is the most important target that we have, trying to see if we can work with our member countries to make the necessary corrective actions. No?
And there's two parts to the SOFI. There's a static part, which is year on year, and then there's a focus part, and you said it's on food inflation this year.
Yeah. So every year the SOFI has the statistics, which is the first part. That's the photograph of all the indicators, the SDG indicators. So every year the SOFI has the statistics, which is the first part. That's the photograph of all the indicators, the SDG indicators. And then the second part is thematic and is based on what FAO believes, based on the experience of what will be a topic that is relevant and where we can contribute in terms of policy design and policy solutions. So this year is on food inflation. Last year was on financing, the agri-food system. The year before was on other topics, so healthy diets. So every year we choose a topic, but at the end of the line, those topics complement to each other. So we keep building up rather than so we keep complementing over time. No?
Let's get into the numbers. What are some of the things that have changed in the past 12 months?
So in the past 12 months, things change a lot. No? Remember, this report is reporting the numbers for 2024. No? So we are referring to the previous year. And the previous year was complicated because of, especially we observe, although the commodity prices were decreasing, we did observe that the food prices were still increasing. What this means, FAO reports what we call the FAO Food Price Index, and the FAO Food Price Index is commodity prices, soybeans, wheat, maize, and so on and so forth. And what we were observing is after the increase that we observed in the past because of COVID, then the exacerbation because of Ukraine war, that the prices started to fall. Because the supplies were good, we were able to move food across the world. So prices were declining, the commodity prices. But when we look at the food prices, that is what you buy when you go to the market, the local market or the supermarkets, the food prices were not declining. And in the cases that they were declining at a very low velocity relative to what the commodity prices were declining. Now, that's super important because not only you can win elections because of that, but also because, or you can lose elections, but also because a poor consumer, a big share of their budget is on food. Yeah. So if food prices goes up, then the share of your budget will be significantly damaged and you won't be able to get the minimum amount of food that you need. Now, the first question for us, and that's what we touched in this year's SOFI is what is happening in food also in the global inflation. So all the non-food elements were also increasing at the same velocity. What the SOFI brings is that no, food was increasing faster and at a higher rate than the non-food elements of the basket. So that means that the overall food inflation was lower in terms of growth and velocity than the food inflation. And that brings a significant impact especially to the poorest part of the population. And that's why we decided to focus on this topic. So this is, I think, one of the major topics that has happened last year, and we were looking at that very carefully. Now, of course, what we are observing lately is a lot of uncertainty in the markets because of the policies and the things that are changing every day. Because of one country, but also because of the response of other countries. So it's not just the United States doing changing policies, but also how other countries are reacting and responding to that. And that is what we need to keep tracking carefully because all of these things have an impact. Every action has an impact, positive or negative, and we need to be able to track those.
The numbers for this year, where have they gone up, gone down? Like, what are some of the core tracking numbers that you've seen?
It's important to explain that every year we update the whole series for all the countries. That's why you cannot compare the SOFI 2024 with the SOFI 2025. Because we improve. Well, why we improve? Because we got new data, we collect new data. And this year, we have significant improvements in data, especially for some big countries in Asia, but also for some countries in Latin America and in other parts of the world. And that implies that the series will change, of course. But the trends essentially remain the same. What we are observing this year is that the news are not as bad as previous year in the sense that we see an improvement. The number of people in hunger is 673 million people. That's the midpoint. So we always produce now ranges of the numbers. Yeah. And the range is between 638 and 720 million people in hunger. So the midpoint is 673 million people in hunger.
And the year before it was how much?
733 million in the old data estimation. No? So there is a relative improvement. If we look with the new data, the prevalence has reduced from 8.5% to 8.2%. So it's a 0.3% of improvement. Now, this number captures a lot of heterogeneity. And this heterogeneity is basically if we split by continents. No? Asia has improved substantially. We have also significant improvements in Latin America, mostly driven by South America. And we continue to have a deterioration in Africa. So the numbers in Africa keeps increasing. And right now we have 307 million people in hunger in Africa, which is a deterioration to previous years. So 20.2% of prevalence of undernourishment. Now, if we take these 673 million people and we project it to 2030, which is where the target is, so if we remain operating the same way, that number will put us, may I say, around 512 million people by 2030. So it's far from where we need to be, which is zero hunger. Yeah. From these 512, now 60% of those are from Africa. So Africa has now surpassed Asia more than last year. But also at the same time, if I have to say, is there a region that will achieve SDG 2? I think Latin America can do it. If they do it, it will imply that they will have to improve in the countries which we are not performing as we expect. But the possibility is very high that Latin America and Caribbean can achieve that goal. Africa will be very difficult. It will imply that we really change the trend. So our goal is to what we can do to accelerate the change in trend so that instead of increasing, they start to decrease. Yeah. That's the goal in Africa, and get as close as we can to the lower number. Asia is improving at a huge velocity. In this report, we show that the velocity in Asia is higher even than Latin America, but the population is bigger. Yeah. So in absolute numbers, it's more difficult to achieve. But again, if they continue at that velocity, they will get very close to the target. So the news are mixed, are good in the overall, not as good as we will have liked. Very good for Asia, very good for Latin America, not good for Africa.
And when you talk about the changes in, say, Africa versus Asia and Latin America, is the trend of Africa accelerating to get worse, or is it?
It's as fast growing worse as fast as it was before.
Okay. So it's not changing.
Although within Africa, there are some countries that are improving, some countries which are not. So at least we see that there is potential to improve. Yeah. Just an issue that we need to scale up that improvement to all the countries in Africa.
What are some of those bright spots?
Look, I prefer not to go to specific countries because there is a lot of sensitivities on this, no? But there are very good countries, as you well know, in Africa, which are putting a lot of effort to improve. And that's where we need to learn. The good experience in South America too, but it's better to talk about the overall picture than to go to specific countries. No?
So the report that's focused on food inflation, that you've told us a little bit about why food inflation matters. So talk to us a little bit more about how does this impact those overall numbers?
So the first number is the hunger number that I mentioned, the 673 million people in hunger. That's chronic undernourishment. The second number is what we call moderate and severe food insecurity, and there we are in 2.3 billion people that are severe or moderate. That means severe is close to hunger, to chronic undernourishment. Moderate means overweight or obese. So it's undernutrition and overnutrition.
Yeah. And that's gone up.
That's also reducing, but slightly. But again, it's reducing. Although obesity and overweight is going up. So the moderate plus severe is going down, but the obesity is going up. No? And it has been going up in the last years. So those are the two critical numbers. And then, of course, we have the access to healthy diets, which has also improved slightly. But we are in 2.6 billion people that don't have access to healthy diets. Before the number was 2.8. No? So again, why is this so important relative to the prices and to the food prices? First, in the case of hunger, is the minimum calorie content. So it's the minimum calories I need to be able to survive. That is mostly cereals, staples. So if those prices go up, of course, you will have a challenge. But what worries us the most is the moderate plus severe and also the access to healthy diets. Why? Because if our diversity of diets are not accessible, then we will get more moderate and severe food insecurity. And food prices, of course, affect that. No? If you look at the food prices basket, of course, the high-value commodities are the ones that increase more relative to cereals. And that is the concern on food prices, especially because it will make the diets more costly. And we have seen an increase consistent to the food prices. The cost of the minimum healthy basket has increased in the last year. And that's problematic. Although we have seen an improvement in access because people are getting in some countries more income, but the cost of the diet has increased. And that reflects directly to the food price index that we are finding. So that's where we want to focus. The next SOFI will go deeper on this and trying to better understand what is happening. Right now, the type of analysis we're doing in the SOFI this year, outside of looking at the difference between food inflation and non-food inflation, is to look at the correlation between food inflation and acute food insecurity, and also on the severe and moderate food insecurity. On the severe, moderate, and food insecurity, we see a correlation with the food prices, as I was saying before. But we are also looking at some cases to try to decompose what was behind this increase. Yes, there was a proportion of it that was explained by the COVID-19, was explained by the demand increase because of the fiscal response of governments, which create a bigger demand, and that put pressure on prices. That's why developed countries were putting policies to reduce inflation. Like, also, we see an effect of the Ukraine war, especially because of the input prices, the fertilizer prices that increased substantially, which affect the production cost. But then there is a big piece of it, 40, 50, or 60% of it, which is not explained by those drivers. No? And those are mostly explained because markets are tight. So when you reduce the supply of cereals in the world of a big exporting country like Ukraine or like Russian Federation or like Brazil because of a drought or Argentina, automatically prices spike. So that market structure is complex and is highly concentrated not only in staples and cereals, but also in high-value commodities. The events that has happened in the last years, like the Ukraine war, has deteriorated that market structure. Why? Because after the 2011 food crisis, there was a lot of effort to increase big exporting countries. Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay came into be a big player, and that reduced the overall concentration. So there were more than top 3 countries. They became top 5, top 6. Ukraine was one of those. Now Ukraine is no longer a top exporting country. So if there is an effect of this war, is that Ukraine is no longer a big player, which means our concentration increase, and that makes the world more vulnerable in the case of the cereals in the world. No?
So does the report make any recommendations on how do we mitigate the impacts of food inflation for the most vulnerable?
The reports try to bring up some ideas of what we can do, no? But I think one of the most important ideas, which is a link between the data on the first part and the second part, is what the countries which are doing better have been doing. And let me take the example of South America. South America has been implementing 2 types of big policies. No? One is social protection. And in social protection, they have shown how effective they were. During COVID-19, for example, Brazil was the only country in the world where extreme poverty reduced because of the social protection plans and the conditional transfers and the transfer programs they have. No other country in the world was able to reduce the level of extreme poverty. It also showed to many of the countries that they were able to reduce the effects of the shock of COVID because of the social protection system in place, which keeps being updated, keeps being dynamic and innovative in terms of technology through face recognition and better ways to target. That's crucial. That Africa needs to learn. Africa doesn't have that level of sophistication on social protection programs, far from it. So we need to learn South-South. I think that's one lesson learned. The second is school feeding programs have shown to be very impactful also in South America, and that's something that Africa also is starting to do. We need to keep working on those. FAO leads a huge network on school feeding programs in Latin America with Brazil. And we are trying to promote that to Africa because these are nutritious school feeding programs. And you see today you have countries like Paraguay, like Dominican Republic, that many countries are scaling up massively their school feeding programs. So that is a policy, a package, a set of policies that are relevant for the most vulnerable people in the income distribution. That we know in South America has worked. The second package of policies is more related to production and productivity and openness of markets. South America learned that the world is important, and therefore they open their economies to the world. That has benefits and costs. But if you become competitive, you can export. And that allowed to many of these countries with investment on technology, on irrigation systems, with investments in technology in terms of seeds. Embrapa is one of the cases in Brazil. In the case of Peru, also a lot of irrigation, very sophisticated irrigation systems in the coast. The same in Chile. Technology innovation on food safety issues in transboundary diseases, controlling diseases in Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, made this region a huge supplier of food in the world, not only on cereals, which is Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina, but also on high-value commodities. That's Chile, Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. We are the bigger exporters in the world of many high-value commodities, fruits and vegetables. So that dual package, plus the trade openness, I think helped the region to show a lot that other regions can learn. Now, there is one issue that still is a question mark in Latin America, which is Latin America has the most expensive cost of a healthy diet. And why is that when they are a big supplier of food to the world? And that's where I think the region still needs to improve on the balance between what goes out and what stays in. Meaning, we also need to create local markets which are strong so that this availability of high-value commodities to have the diversity of foods you need are also available in a bigger dimension, which will lower the cost of a healthy diet. And also, we need to keep working in increasing income. South America is a region that has a lot of informal workers. We need to change that. We need to increase the income of people so that they can also afford. So it's not only the supply side of availability, but it's also the income. And that's also that we need to do in Africa and in many parts of Asia, especially South Asia.
How do you feel initiatives like the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty can be helpful? I mean, this was launched by Brazil in the G20 last year.
We were extremely supportive of the Global Alliance. We are hosting the support mechanism of the Global Alliance. For people that doesn't know, the Global Alliance basically is not just a proposal of the G20 of Brazil by the Brazilian government, but it has three pillars. The pillar of the policy basket, the pillar of the financing coordination, and the pillar of the implementation at the country level. That's what the support mechanism does. Why is this so important? Because in social protection, we know what are the best practices. We have validated them. We have invested a lot of money in testing them. In school feeding programs, the same. And in many productive projects, we know how to operate. We know what to do. That's the South-South learning. So the policy basket gives a huge opportunity to understand what is working. But again, that's not enough. If you don't have the financing, it doesn't work. And we criticize a lot the financing system that is not coordinated. Exactly the pillar of coordination of financing is to coordinate and work with the banks to target those interventions. For example, the World Bank has committed to double the amount of people having access to social protection. That's a huge commitment of the bank. But it will be linked to the policy basket and the best practice in social protection. The African Development Bank also just committed to the countries that are accelerating the process of the Global Alliance. So if we keep doing that and we really do real coordination, I think we will be able to create a big change, but also we will gain a lot of efficiencies. Today we are facing a lot of challenges on financing. It's the moment to take this as an opportunity to better coordinate. And that's where I think the Global Alliance could play a crucial role. And that's why we are so supportive to it.
That's super encouraging to see that there are solutions that if we can coordinate and get the investment focused on them, there is in this challenge. Most of us who have been following the news constantly hear about some of the aid funding cuts. And this is at the same time as the challenges. And we're unpacking the SOFI numbers. This looms large. We have a long way to go on some of these goals if we're going to get there by 2030. What opportunities do you see as the most impactful in the coming years?
In the bigger crisis, you need to see the other side of the coin. No? In COVID-19, we were facing a shock that nobody expected. No, it was an uncertain shock. Nobody expected that shock. And at the beginning, you saw that everybody was talking of a food crisis. And FAO came with this lemma, there is no health without food. Because the focus was on health, but they forgot that they need to look at food too. And that's where food start to move borders, and they start to bring the safety requirements for food to be able to move across borders. And that shows us that we have that capability. But also we learn a lot. We learn that we need to have better information on logistics and mobility of food around the world. That prepares us a lot better for the Ukraine war, for example, where the Black Sea was blocked. That gives us a lot of information that we were not collecting before in terms of input markets. So we always learn and try to improve based on what has happened in the past and the shocks that we have been facing. And yes, what we are observing today is that the money for emergencies, the money for development is going to, ODA is going to shrink. It's not only one country. Most of the G7 countries, even I will say G20 countries, are shrinking. And that will put a significant challenge, especially for Africa and for some parts of South Asia, more marginally for Latin America, because Latin America already ODA had reduced substantially in the past. Now, what to do, no? And what opportunities to do? And here is where I think what we did in the SOFI last year makes a lot of sense. Because the effort of the SOFI last year is, okay, how we can improve the financing, what we can do in financing. And the idea was to look not only at the public side, how we can increase efficiency on the public side, which is the repurposing agenda, and how we can improve the support to agriculture. So orienting the expenditure where it really pays the best and which really targets what you want to achieve, which is more access to healthy diets to minimize non-communicable disease in the future, which is a cost of the tomorrow. Normally we forget the tomorrow. And that's what we need to take into account, because it could be that I can achieve something today, but if I don't care about the tomorrow, it's a problem. The second was we need to attract and coordinate financing of the international financial organizations. And that's where the Global Alliance could play a crucial role. So the result of bringing up the Global Alliance and the coordination of the financing, I hope will make a difference, because that will gain a lot of efficiencies, which will reduce the need and we'll use more efficient every dollar we are giving in grants or loans to countries. The third element was private sector. We need to work with the private sector, but the private sector also needs to play its role. It's not us saying, private sector, you need to help us. No, they have to understand that the future demand depends on how well we do in terms of hunger in the world and in terms of poverty in the world. And I think the private sector is starting to change the way they think. And I think they understand that the de-risking is not only money, de-risking is also information. And that's where FAO is pushing enormously with our hand-in-hand initiative, and how to bring investment plans which are well done so that we de-risk also on information and then the minimum amount of money required to reduce the risk for the private sector to operate. And finally, one of the areas that normally the agri-food system was not involved was on climate issues, on climate financing. The COP28 helped to bring the agricultural sector and the agri-food systems into the discussion on climate financing in a more structured way through the declaration of the UAE on the COP28. And this year, Brazil is also bringing again a chapter on food security in the COP30. Why is so important? Because the agri-food system is always looked at as the one who creates negative things. Deteriorates the land, uses the water, pollutes the water, destroys biodiversity, and emits. 30% of the emissions come from the agri-food systems. But we forget one simple thing. The agri-food system brings the right to food. And it's the only sector that can really improve in terms of improving those negative things, reducing those externalities, so that we can achieve and don't breach the 1.5 degrees Celsius. But today, the climate financing to the agri-food system is only 4% or less. And that doesn't make any sense. So that's the other mechanism of financing that we need to change, and I hope the COP30 will help to do that with Brazil. So we are working very hard in that sense. So I think the financing infrastructure could help us to improve. But then finally is the work of all the agencies like FAO, WFP, IFAD, all the UN agencies and other development agencies, which, yes, we are going to be impacted by the reduction of ODA and by the reduction, but we need to learn and be more efficient. And we need to find ways in keep improving. Now, if we are lucky and ODA start to increase again, we are more prepared, and we will be more impactful in the future. So I think we need to take this also as an opportunity. Now, in terms of the opportunity for countries in the world, I think also is a moment for Africa and the African governments to start to look at it more carefully. They cannot continue in the way they were, depending on ODA. It's the time for them to start to prioritize what they have worked so hard to have, which is the CARAP strategy and the renewed CARAP strategy. The only continent that have such a sophisticated design of a strategy of the whole continent. So let's move ahead and let's work together to make it a reality. And I think those countries have an enormous potential. Africa is an organic continent. They don't use basically fertilizers and pesticides. There's a huge potential to increase productivity, but doing it properly. So to increase productivity in an efficient way, but sustainably. So the potential is enormous, but it also will depend on them, the governments and their people, to change and to create an enabling environment for things to happen.
So there's an enormous amount of hope in what you're sharing around the potential for really scaling up safety nets, school meals, some of these different policies, but also there's a huge opportunity for some of these processes, the Global Alliance, the CADAP process. What keeps you up at night? What's the thing that you're most worried about looking at this year's SOFI numbers and just where it's at as a counter to that hope?
No, look, everything keeps me up at night in these days because things change every day. And we need to be on top of them. We need to have capacity to model things and capacity to respond. For example, what keeps me up is I want this financing pillar and the policy basket to work together so that we can have the impact. I keep arguing that if we don't coordinate financing, things won't happen. And that's a big change if this happens. It's a big change where banks remove their ego and they work together. And I think it's the time to do it. There is no option right now. The other thing that worries me is, okay, we need to increase resilience in the world. We cannot continue as we are because no matter what we do, things become better. We reduce emissions and so on. In the next 10 years, we're going to have a higher frequency of weather events and a higher intensity of them. We just saw what happened in the US. It could happen anywhere. It's not only the difference between the US or Europe to Africa or to certain parts of Latin America is the capacity of absorption. Those countries have money, they can react quickly, they have technology, they can move. Our countries will suffer more and people will die. More people will die. So again, I think it's the moment to resolve that. It's the moment to increase resilience, and that implies early warning systems, good insurance tools of being prepared, but also we need to invest so that we can increase our capacity of absorption. That's the social protection part for the most vulnerable, school feeding programs, conditional cash transfers, but also productive side to increase our capacity of production to be more resilient to these shocks with using technology and innovation, and trade. Trade is central. And we need to work hard to reestablish and strengthen WTO so that we can have a trade system that is fair and we can use it properly. And finally, one of the major drivers right now in the world is conflict. No? And I think that's something that we need to push to minimize. And one way to do it is to increase the welfare of people, especially in internal conflicts. No? And let's hope that wars settle up and things become normal. But we need to avoid things that are deteriorating a situation which are already very bad. No?
As we close, I always like to talk a little bit about food, and we all have different memories that connect to food. And I know when I was in Peru, it's a country that really impacted me in regards to food, just because of the sheer way, the diversity of ingredients, but also the way that people really celebrate food. They come together, they bring dishes, there's so much thought being put into how they're pulled together. And I just remember so many meals sitting, and I was reminded I was with a Peruvian chef that I'd met actually in Lima, just in the UK last 2 weeks ago. And he was cooking, and we were talking about the food memories of taking my kids to his restaurant and him making out of plantain this gnocchi. My kids going, "What is this? I don't know." But then they ate it and it was lovely. But tell me, is there a food memory that shaped you in your journey? You work at the FAO. It's all about food, but
yeah, but you talk about my country, and my country is amazing in terms of food. We're the best food in the world for sure. No, and the diversity is enormous. That's what makes Peru beautiful, no? Yeah. Because it's diversity not only on the type of food that we eat, but also in the culture, the combination of cultures, which is not just Peruvian, it's Asian, African, Spanish, European. So it's amazing. So that merge has great beauty, and that beauty is what we eat. So for me, when we talk about healthy diets, that's the reflection. I always see the different varieties of potatoes. 10 years ago, people will hate potatoes that are small, big, with purple color inside. Yeah. Today, we value that enormously. That's a healthy potato. The Andean potatoes that are grown 3,000 meters and above are the most healthy ones. We have a beautiful project now linking them to produce fried potatoes. And it's a huge business for the farmers. And we are keeping the culture, the way they produce. And we are benefiting the world because it's being exported and it's nutritious. No rhombus attached to it. It's safe. It's good food. So I think we need to keep improving on that, and we need to keep improving in food safety. And that's what will bring the diversity that we need. So food is culture, food is happiness, food is nutrition. And I hope we keep doing efforts to attract the youth to this sector. It's a sector where the youth can really create a huge change. And there is a huge amount of youth around the world that we can attract to the sector. But we need to make it more beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and great to have you on the show.
A pleasure. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.